Yes, indeed. I'm gonna share this on my page as well. Get people to start coming in a bit. Let's see. Oh, I could request viewers to be in my broadcast, so that's a good option. All right, I'm getting set up. Feel free to come in. Feel free to share this on your page as well. We're going to get into some things. I go by the name UnLearn The World. In case you ain't know, now you know. Your man UnLearn The World. Auburn Hip Hop Congress, Hip Hop for Change. Going to do a whole discussion on hip hop, social justice, white supremacy. I'm just going to have everybody come in. If you're tapped in and tuned in right now, I want you to go ahead and hit the share button. Go ahead, share this on your timeline as well. And yeah, we're going to have fun. We're going to have a good talk. Really good talk. I hope everybody's in good spirits. All of those things. Let's see here. Salute. Make sure I'm just kind of like keep this really informal, so feel free to just ask questions in the comment section, provide insight on any of the things that we're talking about. Let me know some things that you would want me to talk about. Again, the topics are hip hop, topics are white supremacy, social justice. I'm just going to be basically talking from my experience as a hip hop artist, educator, you know, somebody who works in the social justice community out here in the Bay Area. It's really surreal to see myself on my screen here. It's like meta. It's like a mirror in a mirror. So weird. And we got people coming in. We got a good amount of people coming in. I'm here for it. Good. So like I said, if you want some specific topics to talk about, you want some specific questions, make sure you put those questions in the comments. Social justice related, white supremacy related, hip-hop related, of course. That's what we're here for. That's what we're here to discuss. I'm going to give it about 1 more minute for people to get in here. Let's see. Cool. All right, I think we have a good amount of people in here. So let's do this. All right, peace, y'all. I think we have enough people in here for me to get started. My name is Marlon Richardson. I go by the artist name UnLearn The World. Let me adjust my camera real quick, too. Yeah. I go by the artist name UnLearn The World. Originally from New York City, I represent an amazing organization called Hip Hop for Change, as well as Today's Future Sound. Shout out to Today's Future Sound as well. You are checking us out right now on Auburn Hip Hop Congress webpage on Facebook. Make sure you hit that like button. You know what I'm saying? Make sure you support not only Hip Hop for Change, but also check out Auburn Hip Hop Congress. Check out their website, all the things they're in tune with, all the things they're involved with. We're going to be having a discussion today with regard to hip hop as it relates to social justice and as it relates to being a vehicle to combat white supremacy. Obviously, needless to say, a lot of issues going on that we're all kind of dealing with in one way or another, that we're all kind of processing. So I just want to provide some insight into some context into that with regard to hip hop. You know what I'm saying? All too often we think about hip hop as a movement with regard to culture, a movement with regard to creativity, a movement with regard to artistry and expressing yourself and being inclusive. And I think what is missed often is that hip hop is never seen, at least in today's modern context, as a social justice mechanism. It is a means by which social justice is obtained, right? Now, I think a lot of us hear social justice. We hear that buzzword a lot in a lot of what we do, whether you're an educator, whether you're an artist, whether you're an activist. We're hearing and using this term all the time, especially in an election year. We don't really know what it means. A lot of people have no idea what it means. to define it, justice, when we talk about social justice, we're talking about justice in terms of the distribution of wealth, opportunities, and privileges within a society. And hip-hop starts initially as a social justice mechanism for young people of color in the Bronx in the 1970s. I'm not really going to get into the history of hip-hop unless you guys want me to. But suffice it to say, and let me put my watch on so we can make sure that we're on time and, you know, I'm not taking too much of your time. But suffice it to say that hip-hop starts in the Bronx as a social mechanism, social justice mechanism, specifically and primarily for people of color, primarily black and Latino youth, particularly Puerto Rican youth, as well as Dominican youth in the Bronx, New York. You know, outside of you have to understand the way that hip-hop starts initially, right? This is a means for young kids to evolve and to find a vehicle for not only expressing their rage, but to process their healing through creativity rather than the destructive lifestyle patterns that preceded them, primarily gangs in the instance of the Bronx in the 1970s, right? As they are starting to move away from gang culture, we're starting to find the creativity of hip-hop become more appealing to the young kids in the Bronx, so much so that the Cool Herc parties that were being thrown in Sedgwick houses then became block parties. They then became full-on jams outside of the houses and outside of the gymnasiums and the community centers that once housed them, because the community was part of it, right? So hip-hop becomes a means of building community through the performance and through the celebration of shared ideas, goals, and experiences. Now, what we often don't think about is why hip-hop matters. Why does hip-hop matter in today's current context? Why does hip-hop matter to the average person who may not listen to the music or identify with the music? It's because the world all around you, one way or another, is influenced by hip-hop. Whether you listen to pop music or something else, hip-hop has shown itself over the last 46 years to be an economic viable force. And as we're getting into these new frontiers, hip-hop is going to continue to show itself to be the vehicle by which social justice can be obtained, and kind of a meeting area, a meeting path for a lot of us. You know what I'm saying? It's a culture that's inclusive of all people. And because it's inclusive of all people over the last several years that we've seen that, it's a good vehicle to use when we're talking about race relations in America, when we're talking about obtaining social justice for black and brown communities in America. Hip-hop becomes a good place to start. I've been on record as a hip-hop educator and as a producer and as a rapper saying that hip-hop is the vanguard to the political and the spiritual evolution and revolution of human beings. That's been my position for as long as I could remember, and it's the best way that I can articulate it. The reason being is because it's inclusive of all people, right? But it's also a vehicle by which we can humanize black and brown lives. I think, and I've always said this, I think it's a lot harder for a cop to shoot a young kid if they share in music, or if this person reminds them of somebody they know in their lives, right? And that speaks to, you know, the insular nature of a lot of white supremacy. The insular nature of white supremacy exists in environments whereby we don't see people who look differently than us or hold different viewpoints in us, you know? I'm going to start reading some of these comments in a minute, and then I'll answer some of your questions and provide insight or a response to a lot of the things that you guys are bringing up. So give me 1 second. Shout out to everybody tuning in. Make sure you share. You know what I mean? Shout out to Shannon, who has something to say. She says, because it sounds so good, you can get all sorts of people to hear the message and being shared. Absolutely. My man Gerald Williams says, so been putting out hip-hop music for a few years now, more consistently as of last year. Been feeling called to write about all of this systematic racism and police brutality, and just political stuff, or political stuff. Experienced racism myself as a half black man. Just not sure how to write about those experiences in my music. Do you have any suggestions? I would like to reach a wider audience regarding these certain topics. Okay. I appreciate that. Thanks to Gerald. Thanks for sharing, for tapping in. To speak to Gerald's immediate question is, what do we do as of now, as we are now starting to get called towards having a social message, right? I think more so than anything else, regardless of where you are on the spectrum and regardless of where you are culturally, whether you're white, black, Latino, whatever the case is, I think now is a time more so than ever for us to really check in with ourselves. Check in with how we feel about the moment that we're in, right? Check in with yourself if you feel annoyed by the protesting and the social media posting. If that annoys you and that bothers you and you have a visceral response to people actively pursuing justice one way or another, check in with yourself to see why that makes you uncomfortable, right? And try to work through that discomfort. Because if it's uncomfortable for you just to see people vocalizing their dissent, imagine how uncomfortable it is for people to have experienced it and felt it, right? So that's one thing that we have to think about. I would also say, for those non-POC members of our hip-hop community who are compelled to write songs, and I've had a lot of friends of mine who are white hit me up and not only just check in with me as a black dude and whatever the case is, and I appreciate that, I really do. I think it's imperative for you know what I'm saying? But also, if you feel compelled as a non-POC person to write about oppression, I would add to that and start also considering lending your platform to the voices of the oppressed, right? It's one thing to be drawn and be moved to talk about oppression. I think it's another place to yield your space, to provide that space for other voices to be amplified at this time. You know what I'm saying? This is not to say that non-POC people can't be part of the conversation. This is not to say that non-POC people cannot be part of the solution or part of the cultural movement and the creativity that's blossoming from this. I just think it's appropriate to understand where you're moving, how you're moving, and who's leading. Right? I think it's important in this time for POC people, primarily black people, to lead the conversations, for their voices to be amplified. Gerald, I can understand your position, being that you're half black is from what you were saying. Shout out to Gerald in the comments. You know, my personal experience is that I grew up in a primarily white environment. My mother, who raised me from age 0 to 13, was white and Jewish. That's the environment that I grew up with. I grew up with a lot of people who did not look like me, right? What made me take to hip hop in the way that I did as a young kid trying to explore who I was the fact that I saw representation in that. It's the fact that I saw people who looked like me expressing themselves in a safe way, right? Having a platform and a position for them to vent their rage, but also facilitate their own healing. Right? That's what hip hop introduces into POC communities. This means by which we can express our rage, right? Considering that I think they say 3 of 4, or actually no, it's 1 in 3 young kids in the inner city have undiagnosed mental illness. That is really rooted in adverse childhood experiences. It's rooted in trauma, you know? And the question then becomes, with all this trauma, with trauma like being poor, with trauma like being oppressed, with trauma like being harassed by police officers or gang violence in your communities, these are all perpetual traumas that the average person of color experiences on a day-to-day basis, right? There is no automatic mental health mechanism, nor has there been in our communities, right? So in the 70s, we literally created it. We created our space to express our rage, right? Rather than killing or shooting or stabbing each other, which there was still a lot of that. Let's not say that hip hop solved that problem, but it allowed an alternative to be provided. Right? And I think more so than anything else, we need to be shown these alternatives. As young people of color, as young people who identify with this culture, the culture in and of itself and the creativity therein becomes the means by which we can express our rage in a safe and healthy way, in a productive way. It becomes the means by which we start initiating healing, you know? Let me check out some of the other questions. My man Marco Yoakum, shout out to Marco Yoakum, says, what are your thoughts on removal of police systems within our community? So I'm hearing this is the new wave, right? This is part of being solution oriented as we start thinking about how to dismantle racism in our country, how to dismantle systems of racism in our country. One of the suggestions that has now been taken wave is we should dismantle the police. We should defund the police. I definitely believe that defunding the police or allocating some of those resources that are being given to the police, if you can give those resources to community organizations or community-based services where the police do not have to be called, then I think it's important for us to take advantage of that. Definitely think that there are more people out there in the community who have capital within their community who can handle issues more so than the police. And for those who may be of two minds, we have to understand and try to realize or kind of think about how the police even came to pass. You got to think about the police in and of themselves. Law enforcement in and of itself was birthed from trying to catch runaway slaves. This is how the police force in our country existed, right? So we haven't had police since the beginning of the country with the founding fathers. We've only had it for 100 plus some odd years, and it really came as a response to emancipating slaves. So the system in and of itself, the law enforcement system that we have in place, absolutely supports and benefits white supremacy. It is a white supremacist power structure from its inception. So the idea that we can somehow not have police without that implicit bias is, I don't know how we square that. I really don't. I really don't. But I do feel and believe that we can allocate the resources that were given to the cops to other avenues and to other people. 100%. You know, I think a lot of that has to do with, just think about why we fund the cops as much as we do. A lot of it has to do with 9/11. If you look at 2001, 9/11, the Patriot Act created contracts for defense. And all that money then got funneled not only into defense funds for the Army, military, Marines, Navy, all of that, but then it also got funneled into police departments. Law enforcement over the last 10 years or even 20 years has been progressively starting to be militarized, right? How many people you know, or how many neighborhoods do you go to that are obscure, odd neighborhoods that got brand new cop cars? Like, why does a neighborhood that's a square mile have brand new police cars, have brand new equipment to use to quell political dissent, right? A lot of that comes from 9/11. A lot of that comes from the Occupy Wall Street movement, where people were hitting the streets in New York City. So the police over the last 20 years, since the Patriot Act, since 9/11, since the war in Iraq, have been ramping up to be militarized. But it's not only the police being militarized in terms of their equipment and their resources. The police are militarized in their personnel, right? There are many police officers are veterans, right? And we appreciate the service that you provide for us as veterans. But with that said, you also have police officers who used to be in the military, who had to go on several different tours in Iraq and or Afghanistan, who have been programmed and conditioned in those environments to dehumanize their opponent, right? We didn't look at Iraqis as human beings. We didn't look at Afghanis as human beings. It wasn't part of the lexicon. If you're military out there, you can even chime in and let me know or clarify some stuff for me. As far as I know, in the military in Iraq, they were calling the Iraqi people Hajis, right? This is nomenclature. This is using terms and words, right? Derogatory terms. You're using these words as a means to dehumanize your opponent. It's a war tactic, right? So what do you say to the cop who's already been given this training, who's already been given these resources, who's already been made to think that the areas that they patrol are dangerous, that they're meant to kill you, that they don't like you much, right? And you have that training from being in a war environment. Now you're placed in Compton. Now you're placed in Oakland. Now you're placed in New York City, right? Now you're even placed in Detroit or even some other obscure part of the United States. But you're there with this training. You're not from the communities that you're policing, so you don't have the understanding of how to talk to the people in the community. Some of you barely have an understanding of how to talk to black people in general. I mean, Pew Research studies show that 3 of 4 white people in America, based on Pew Research studies, not taken that too long ago, 3 of 4 do not have a personal friend of color. So with that said, if most white people in America do not have a personal friend of color, then where are they getting their narratives from? Where are they getting their archetypes of black people and the way that black people navigate through this world? Where are they getting their understanding? I would submit and argue that they're getting their understanding from television. They're getting their understanding from media. So when corporations then take on, right, and they co-opt the entire culture and show young black men to be hyper-violent, hypersexual, hyper-misogynist, glorifying materialism, glorifying drug use. When you have one of the longest running shows in American history, Cops, that just recently got canceled because of the backlash from the protests, right? When you have one of the longest running shows in America every night showing you footage of black people being put in cuffs, being arrested, using drugs. If you don't have a personal friend of color, this becomes your perception. And your perception is rooted in media coverage. Media has a very clear agenda in terms of the way they give you provide the perception of black people, right? Or people of color in general. It's a social engineering mechanism. We've allowed our culture in terms of hip hop to become a social engineering mechanism for white supremacy, right? The corporate co-optation of hip hop that only allows a very narrow narrative of experiences to be shown and to be represented in a mass way, right? Sex sells, violence sells, so they show us to be very violent and very hypersexual, right? This becomes not only a mechanism for capitalism, but it becomes a mechanism for social engineering, right? We're not even going to talk about the fact that the corporations that put out 85% of most hip-hop music has vested interest in the private prison industrial complex. So that's a whole different conversation in and of itself. So they have a vested interest in black people going to prison. They have a vested interest in the mindset that creates crime, or that creates people or prompts people to do crime, because it's a behavior thing, right? And it's representation. So for me, as a young black kid looking at people to look up to, or looking for people to look up to, right? By just happenstance, I found rappers, and I found rappers who had positive messages in their music, right? Artists like KRS-One, artists like Wu-Tang, for the most part, right? We can make the argument out there about Wu. But like, I found artists who had positivity in their messages that made me want to be a more better student, that made me want to be more intellectual, that made me want to excel at things. But part of the motivation in me wanting to excel at things was for people to see me as a human being. And it really amazes me that even in 2020, a person of color has to excel at everything they do just to be given and afforded the basic privileges that the average white person accepts and takes for granted every day. So I'll repeat that again. The average POC person today has to be exceptional and excel at everything they do, literally just to get the same level of legitimacy as a human being as the average white person. Now, that gross disbalance in and of itself is enough for us to start checking in with ourselves as to how bad racism is. And I want people to understand racism in an abstract form. We're not talking about racism with regard to just somebody with a MAGA hat on who is just snickering their teeth at a rap video. This is not, that should not be the poster boy for racism, right? Because that exempts too many white people, right? If you think that that's what racism means, then if you're a white person, you feel exempt because that's not you. Right? But that's not to say that your life as a white person who may have progressive views, that you don't benefit from a racist power structure, that you don't benefit from white supremacy, right? And in many cases, if you're poor and white, or if you're a woman and white, you will lean on that privilege. You will often lean on that privilege because it's a lot better than being black. It's, you know what I'm saying? That people lean on that privilege, and your unwillingness to give up that privilege, your unwillingness, white, or not even to cast aspersions, but white people's unwillingness to give up that privilege, and white people's progressive or perpetual unwillingness to be uncomfortable when dealing with issues of race is what maintains white supremacist power structures. You know what I'm saying? I recall one of the most offensive things I was ever told as a grown-up, as a grown-ass man. And I've had my instances with racism and being called the N-word and all the typical things that black people experience, right? Frisked by the cops and all of that. One of the most offensive things that has ever happened to me as a black man in America is for a white woman to tell me that I am one of the whitest black men she's ever met, mainly because I didn't fit her archetypes or tropes of what black men are supposed to be. Because I spoke proper, because I wasn't violent, because I wasn't using drugs or whatever the case is, somehow that made me not black enough. Because to be black, you have to have all these different things in her brain, right? So we have to take inventory of ourselves in terms of what we determine to be blackness, right? And how we associate that. And whether or not we associate humanity with blackness. And it's not our fault if you don't. It's not your fault. But it is your fault if you're not trying to dismantle those archetypes. It is your fault if you don't make it a continual process by which you have to be conscious of your privilege and learn how to yield that for the betterment of all of us. Right? That becomes a new conversation that we're having. So more so than dismantling police departments, let's start dismantling the comfort of white privilege. Let's start dismantling the comfort of white fragility, right? In the same way that me, almost 39 years old, I have to walk every day conscious of what it is to be black in America. I'm aware of that every single day of my life. I think it's also appropriate at this point for white people to be aware of their privilege and what that means in the society versus people of color, primarily black, Latino, Asian, the LGBT community, trans community, all these different communities that are marginalized, right? While we exist in our privilege. I mean, we have American privilege too, One of the reasons that I even involved myself in activism at a young age is because I couldn't process the reality that I learned when I was younger, that most of the world lives on $2 a day. That was the issue for me, right? I couldn't exist in my American privilege, knowing that my American privilege came at the expense of other people living without. I couldn't rest in my American privilege knowing that my tax money or the tax money that my parents pay for weapons to bomb children in Palestine. That did not sit right with me, and I was 13 years old realizing this, right? So if I had to process that and I had to check my own American privilege, even as a black man who doesn't have the same privilege in this country, imagine what we have to do as non-POC people to check your privilege and to recognize how that can be utilized. First of all, recognize that it exists, because a lot of people out there are still in denial, as if I've heard things about reverse racism. I've heard things about like, oh, I'm not racist because I have, a black friend at work. If you have the one black friend at work, you really need to check your life, right? I think if you are trying, if you are uncomfortable with the current political and social climate, and your defense in terms of who you are as a person is to lean on the one black friend you have, maybe you need to kind of reassess what it is to be progressive in this country, and what it is to be diverse, and what it is to allow diversity, right? So I'm gonna stop ranting. Let me just check out some questions. You know what I mean? Mark Katz, shout out to Mark Katz. You're right, 100%. Dismantle the comfort of white fragility, right? I think that's first and foremost. I was on the radio last weekend, and I just played an amazing lecture by Robin DiAngelo. Shout out to Robin DiAngelo. She has an amazing book called White Fragility, and she has several lectures on YouTube. You can type in her name and you'll find amazing lectures. She's a diversity and inclusion expert, and she goes into detail about what white fragility is and how it maintains white supremacy, and what you can do if you're on your process of allyship to start dismantling your fragility. Right? It's an ongoing process, no different than us as people of color who have to be conscious of that. It's an ongoing process. So I appreciate Mark for shouting that out. I'm just going to go down here and just check out a couple of things. Feel free to ask questions as well. Definitely feel free to ask questions. But the question then becomes for me, how does hip hop help? How can hip hop help in this current moment, right? Well, let's first look at what the issue is. Let's first look at how hip hop maintains white supremacy. I think first of all, you have hip hop in a space where it's co-opted by corporations, right? The gross majority of our music that we consume as hip-hop artists or people who love the music is owned by 3 corporations. So you have 3 corporations, none of them which helmed by a person of color, that own 85% of the hip-hop music that is put out for us to consume, right? That's already a problem. What also exacerbates that problem is that 90% of that music that is put out there is consumed by young white males from 18 to 25. So the consumer base for the music that is being created by people of color is white people who find it appealing when black people are talking about violence and misogyny and all of that, because it reinforces a previously established stereotype of what authenticity is for black people, right? Like, that's what they think is authentic. This is why when it comes to hip-hop and we talk about keeping it real, and hip-hop supports and embraces authenticity, right? Corporate co-optation of hip-hop reinforces these stereotypes because in the brains of the consumer base that they're trying to appeal to, that is authentic, as opposed to like a regular black guy who comes from a middle-class background and has 2 parents who love each other and all of that. White people don't want to hear that, right? That's not what sells when you look at the current landscape in terms of what's selling, right? You have young kids propagating violence because they feel that that's what sells. And we reinforce that through our corporate consumer capitalist model, right? This is why when I go and teach in classes, a lot of times young kids are like, oh, I don't know how to rap. I can't rap. Even adults are like, I don't know how I rap or can't rap, because they think rapping involves being ratchet. They think rapping involves being derogatory. They think it involves being a criminal. And because they can't speak to those experiences, they don't think they can rap, right? So I think it's incumbent on us in the hip-hop community, whether you're white or black, to make it a point to not only uplift and amplify voices of the oppressed in this current climate, but after the trend of this goes down, I think we as members of the hip-hop community should make it a point to amplify the voices of people who have socially conscious messages in their music. Right? And I always tell people hip-hop is a broad, vast spectrum. I am not expecting anybody to be Public Enemy and KRS-One overnight, nor am I expecting them to do that every single day of their lives. We need everything. We need all the voices we have. And hip-hop is a vast spectrum. On one side of it all, you have Cardi B and twerking. On the other side of it all, you have, you know, Immortal Technique and Dead Prez, right? Like, you have both of these in these worlds. So I think it's important for us to recognize that in this vast spectrum, balance needs to be created. If we have this vast spectrum, why is it that the artists that are getting the 25, 30 million views on their videos or their streamings on Spotify or iTunes or wherever, why is it that they only have a specific kind of narrative? Why is it that women in hip hop are only relegated to a specific kind of narrative? Right? And that's celebrated more so than the other vast narratives of the female experience, right? We have to start changing the way we consume the music and the music that we put out, right? A lot of us are guilty of this as artists. We all want to sound like what's hot in the street right now, right? But if what's hot in the street is death and destruction, and that's not the lifestyle that you live, then it becomes a problem. This is why Hip Hop for Change was even created, to provide not only an economic base of self-determination for ourselves as progressive hip-hop artists, right? But also to act as a community-based counter-narrative to the billion-dollar machine that is socially engineering our people into prisons. So these are things that you have to start thinking about. But I want to start taking some questions. I don't know what time it is. Oh, we're past 5:05. Okay, so we have about 25 minutes left, but I want to start taking some questions. The homie Mark Katz says, let's see, skateboarders get thrown on cop cars, get injured, and get harassed and physically abused for skating. I've also got harassed for standing up with my family of color and Black Lives That Matter. My girlfriend in the 70s was Puerto Rican, and I've been around people of color and Black Lives That Matter for years. He goes, I've been harassed from the system for standing up with other people of color. We must focus on Black Lives Matter right now. Please love US skateboarders too. I love skateboarders. You know what I'm saying? My girlfriend skateboards. Like, people skateboard. We down. We're here for it. Right? We are standing for you. Let's focus on Black Lives Matter now. Right. I think what Mark is responding to is the whole all lives matter response, right? That becomes the counter narrative to Black Lives Matter, right? Like, that becomes the issue, right? People get defensive about police and all of that. My issue is that if your immediate response is to counter Black Lives Matter with all lives matter, if your immediate response to the injustice going on is to care about the cops who have billions of dollars of funding and they have guns, if your immediate position is to care about them more so than them stamping on a man's neck for 9 minutes, then you really need to do some intake in terms of your life. And I don't like to make a judgment call. You know what I'm saying? I'm not here to be preachy. I'm not here to, like, say what we need to do versus what we need. I'm just trying to facilitate a discussion, right? But I think that in that discussion, I'm advising all of us look at ourselves right now, right? If we're going to make this workshop based instead of just me talking, let's start looking at it this way. Look at everything that's currently going on in our political and social climate. I want you to check in with yourself about how you feel about it and really write it down. Write a paragraph to yourself about how you're feeling about this moment right now. Not me talking, but in general, right? If your reaction is, yo, I'm annoyed at protesters, if your reaction is to get upset about looting or to condemn rioting, then I think you need to start taking inventory about what's really bothering you, right? I think all too often what really bothers a lot of white people is when Black people say something or speak up because they feel entitled to basic human decency. I think that really puts a lot of white people in a fragile position, right? And for a lot of different reasons. One, you don't want to give up your comfort. You don't want to give up your privilege because you recognize on one level or another that you benefit from it, right? So there's that discomfort in and of itself. But then I also think that there is in the back of the mind, and I think Malcolm X said this also, there is the fear of retribution. There is the fear that if and when white people become the minority, that they will be victims to the same brutality. Right? And I think that this is a false concept because it reinforces the previously introduced conditioning of Black people being vehemently violent. Right? It reinforces the stereotype that Black people are angry all the time, that they're hyper violent. I mean, we have a right to be angry. I think there is a valid right to be upset. And if you understood what the average Black person has to do on an everyday basis to suppress their anger versus you, I think you would have a different opinion, right? And again, I'm thinking hypothetically. But let's see. Yeah, the focus right now is on trying to change systemic racism. This is the war that we are fighting. It is to change the hearts and the minds of the average person in America to humanize the pain of Black people. That is the priority right now. So if dismantling or defunding the police, that's one angle. That's not going to solve anything. That's not going to solve everything that we're dealing with, right? Taking money from the police and giving it to schools, giving it to mental health facilities, giving it to nonprofits, I think does a better job for us. I think there are nonprofits out there like Hip Hop for Change, like Today's Future Sound, Beats, Rhymes, and Life, Auburn Hip Hop Congress, who are making the means to establish hip hop as a culture that is inclusive of all people so that we can transcend issues with regard to race. Because within those contexts and within the sharing of ideas and the sharing of creativity is where we find our humanity. Right? Creativity is one of the things that makes us essential in terms of classifying ourselves as human beings. Right? The fact that human beings can design elaborate buildings and cars and other forms of technology is what separates us from every other walking, breathing thing on this planet. Right? So our creativity makes us intrinsically human. Right? So if we're sharing in creative endeavors, that allows us to transcend racial issues, but it doesn't allow us to transcend race. Let's not try to live in a post-racial world. We need to be very clear right now, as of right now, what it is to be black in America. And I think white people need to understand it just as much as black people understand it matter-of-factly. I think it's important for us to take inventory of that. I think it's important for us to take inventory of what they contribute as being another culture, right? If you know, and hip hop does that. Hip hop has done. We take from Asian culture, right? People are very surprised when I go into schools and I talk about how breakdancing incorporated martial arts and how Bruce Lee was revered in you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't think people recognize that hip hop is already taking from other cultures. The reason I listen to as much music as I listen to as a rapper and a producer is because I'm trying to find things to sample, right? So that exploration for creativity has allowed me to expose myself to Arab music, Ethiopian music, you know, Chinese music, music from all over the world, right? You start to see the humanity in other people. They hurt like I hurt. They are happy like I'm happy. They have children and they love their children in the way that I love my children, right? But I think more so than that, we can recognize in ourselves our desire to love our own children, right? I'm a father. I love my kids. I'm sure you are parents out there. You love your children with everything you have, right? I think we have transcended and we have turned a corner when we love other people's children the way we love our children. And that needs to be looked at. I think we need to look at that, right? If we can start seeing the humanity in each other's children and what they put forward in the way of creativity, what we put forward in the way of creativity, that gives us the humanizing factor that we need so that you don't see black people as a threat, so that you don't see black people as criminals or people of color as shiftless or lazy, or they're savages, they're animals, they're trying to get a handout. Like, these are the things that are usually the retorts of people with white supremacist mindsets, right? Oh, they're just looking for a handout. Oh, they just want to be thugs. They want to beat people up, right? It illegitimizes our anger, right? And if we're going to get into respectability politics, that's another thing that we should also check in terms of ourselves. The respectability politics. I've seen so many memes evoking Martin Luther King, saying that Martin Luther King didn't riot, Martin Luther King didn't loot, but he still saved the world. But yeah, Martin Luther King was also still a victim of white supremacy to his death, right? Like, so I think we need to kind of remove these false equivalencies, and I think we need to remove this concept of respectability that only if we asked politely, somehow it would be better. We asked politely. We were asking politely in the 60s, bro. We were asking politely back then. We were, you know, I mean, you have the Tupac interview out there that breaks it all down very clearly. You know what I'm saying? When he talks about the salami dangling from the ceiling and you got people starving outside, right? We have that. So I want people to, take inventory of what's going on in the world, how you're feeling about it, and write that out. Now, if you are prompted to action, I think one thing is important for you to write out is, what is it that you want to get by being actively involved in either a protest, an organization, volunteering? What is it that you want for yourself? I want you guys to write that out. What is it? What am I looking for in myself emotionally, mentally, spiritually, physically by getting involved in this movement, right? The second question is, what do I have to contribute, right? If it's just a rap song, we're already missing the boat, right? If you feel that the best you can do is just write a rap to throw on SoundCloud, we're missing the opportunity to really transcend some things. And I think it's important for us to really write out, what can we contribute? Can you contribute your privilege? Do you have a large enough platform that you can yield to black voices and POC voices? Can you contribute financially? You know what I'm saying? That's not going to kill the problem, but it definitely helps. You know what I'm saying? Contributing to charities or organizations that are actually doing the work, that's great. Volunteering, you know, I would say all of these things are great, but I would also say that you should allow the black people in your life to take the lead in this, right? It is not your position as somebody with privilege to take the lead in speaking out against injustice. This is not to say that you shouldn't be speaking out. Everyone should be speaking out. But I think that you should let black people take the lead, right? Don't try to make it all about you and try to make it so that other people see you being an ally, even though you may not be an ally, right? Like, we need real allies and real people doing real things. So that's what I want you guys to write out. Write out how you feel about the current situation. Write about all the things that you want to get out of being involved in this movement. Write what you have to contribute to this movement other than a rap song, right? Write about whether or not your contributions or the contributions you want to give will help or hurt the larger movement, right? It goes back to what I was saying about allowing people of color to take the lead and amplifying their voices more so than yours. Really ask yourself if you're in it for the long haul. I think all of our minds have been awakened from everything that's been going on right now. I think all of us are kind of hip to it, but I was unfortunately reminded of something I posted on Facebook in 2014. It was June 10th, 2014, and it said, woe to the politicians and law enforcement who hide behind their positions of power to enforce their will on the people. I was literally saying that in response to the police brutality that was going on in 2014. So we're not a stranger to this issue. Hopefully we don't have to continue to protest about cops killing black men or black women. Rest in peace to Breonna Taylor, right? Hopefully that becomes less and less as the years go by. But I want you guys to write, as you're writing all these other exercises that I'm having you write, also check in with yourself as to whether or not you're in it for the long haul. Is this now going to be your life's work, or is it going to be a continuous thing for you, right? Whether you're actively involved in the movement or not, even if you're just kind of wrestling with your own privilege, I want you to kind of be honest and recognize with yourself whether or not that's something that you want to be uncomfortable with for the rest of your life. Are you going to make the vested conscious effort to check your privilege, to check how it relates to the people around you, to make sure that the people around you are a diverse group of people and that you're not insulated by your whiteness, that again, reinforces all these different tropes, right? But these are the things that we need to start checking with. How am I feeling about everything? What do I want to get out of getting involved? What can I contribute to getting involved? Is my contribution contrary to the larger mission? And am I in it for the long haul? These are the 5 things that we're looking for. I'll be sure to post this on Auburn Hip Hop Congress Facebook page as well. And if this is your first time going to Auburn Hip Hop Congress, make sure you check in with them, hit that like button. If you're coming from Auburn Hip Hop Congress and watching me on their feed, check in with me, UnLearn the World. But I'm going to open up the floor for questions. Go ahead and type your questions in the comments. I'll be more than happy to add or answer. I hear Tara Buckley, thoughts on mixed family and when the head of household is not BIPOC. I am the father of 2 mixed children. I have no problem with that. Both of my children identify as black. They've never been told not to. I've made it a point to, and I think that level of allyship starts in the home. You know, I think if you are if you are the parent of a mixed race child who either passes as black or identifies as black, I think it is important for you to recognize that their experience and how they navigate through this world is vastly different from your experience, right? And this is somebody, again, as a product of a white household. I grew up with white people most of my young life. From age 0 to 13, I was in it, right? And in that environment, though, it was very clear that I was different. It was very clear, and it was made very clear to me that I was different. It was never celebrated. It was never valued, right? I never had the conversation with my white mom about how to act with cops, right? That would have helped me out a lot when I was getting checked and frisked at 13 years old for having microphones in my pocket and they thought it was a gun, right? Like these are things that it would have helped me. But I don't expect, I didn't expect then, nor do I expect now for my white mother back then to have taught me anything if that wasn't her frame of thinking. If she was living in this matter-of-factly post-racial utopia in her brain, I don't expect her to have known that. But if we're having the conversation now, right? If you are the parent of mixed children who look or identify as black, I think it's important to make sure that you value their culture. If you're a single mom, if you have a black man in the house, or you have black relatives, then they can help in that. But it's also important for you as their mother or their father, who may be white or whatever the case is, to value their blackness and speak and value their experience, or validate their experience, and recognize that their experience is vastly different from your own. Do we have any other questions? Let's see. Seeing a lot of insight. Shout out to Marquette. Shout out to everybody tapping in, tuning in with me. Shout out for the question, Tara Buckley. Shout out to Auburn Hip Hop Congress for having me. Trying to see if there's any other questions. I'm just here vibing. What time is it right now?
5:21.
All right. So we have about 9 more minutes. There's about 14 people tuned in right now. Shout out to everybody. We've had a lot of people on this thing, so I'm excited. Ratchet and Woke podcast tomorrow, Friday, 8 p.m. You know, I do a podcast with Lil MC. So you can check me out there. You can check me out on UnLearn The World on Instagram. I also have a website, unlearntheworld.com. You can check out all my brand new music and all of that. I do a series called Find the Light Fridays on Friday on Instagram. I show you a song that I've been working on. I put it out on Bandcamp and SoundCloud, but then I show you behind the scenes of how I came up with the beat, how I came up with the lyrics, so you could expect a brand new edition of that tomorrow. Check that out. Also, check out my album Light Years that's dropping soon. It's very interesting because I think the topics that I cover on my album are very prevalent to what's going on today and what's going on now. And I've been writing this album for like the last 6 months without even thinking about all of this. But with that said, it's always in the back of my mind. Concepts or thoughts about police brutality are also, you know, always on my mind. That's something that we don't escape as people of color. It is always something that's very in front of our brain in terms of the way we're navigating through the world and whether or not police are getting involved. You know what I'm saying? I'm respectful, and I appreciate the movement that's happening now, not only just for Black lives and legitimacy and ending racism, but also to divest in the police, right? Because you got to look at the police, especially now, the way they've militarized them over the last 20 years. The police are like a paramilitary force, and they're being charged with patrolling communities that don't need that level of oppression. They don't need that level of militarism in their communities, especially Black and brown communities. We don't need that level of police officers, and especially if the police officers are not from our community. So I think there needs to be a new pathway, like they talk about the school to prison pipeline. If we want to have more people of color in law enforcement, there needs to be a campaign to recruit from these communities, right? It's all about representation. If you don't see yourself being a cop because nobody around you looks like you who is a cop, then you're going to want to be a cop. Same thing with teachers, doctors, lawyers, right? If all we're left are archetypes of basketball players and rappers, then we're losing the game. So we need to start celebrating various experiences. We need to start celebrating the broad spectrum of the Black experience, right? And not just American Black. We're talking about Afro-Latinos. I've been very inspired by my Afro-Latino community for really speaking out in this time and holding our countries accountable, particularly Dominican Republic, but Puerto Rico, Cuba, other countries in the Latin world, about their treatment of Black people, right? I've been very relieved to see that people in my native Washington Heights, in the midst of the violence and clashes between Black people and Dominicans, that we showed solidarity, that we marched with them, that our neighborhood was showing that we were part of this, that we do identify as Black. That literally, like, it made me really emotional to see that. It was an amazing picture that I saw on Instagram, and there's these 4 tall buildings in the picture, and I grew up across the street from those buildings. They're called the Bridge Apartments. They're literally apartment buildings on top of the George Washington Bridge. And I saw those buildings in this picture of Haitians and Dominicans marching for Black lives. It was probably the best thing I've ever seen in the last 3 years of my life. Like, just being able to watch that. But I think that we're now having these uncomfortable conversations that we need to have, right? Pressure makes diamonds. You're not going to develop without some level of conflict. We need to have these confrontations so that we can get to the next stage of our humanity. We're not going to evolve as a species if we're still dealing in superiority or inferiority complexes with regard to the color of our skin. It doesn't help us. It doesn't serve us none, right? We need to start establishing justice before we can start establishing peace. Things need to be not only equal, but equitable, right? We're not fighting just for equality. We're fighting for equity. We're not just fighting for diversity. We're also fighting for inclusion, right? It was told to me, diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance at the party, right? And I think we need not only diversity and inclusion in terms of our race relations, but we need diversity and inclusion with regard to hip-hop music and the various narratives that we would appreciate having, right? If we had more narratives in the scope of hip-hop, I think it benefits all of us. If we celebrated more aspects of hip-hop culture other than just rapping, if we celebrated breakdancing just as much as we celebrated rapping, you would see a change, right? Because if we talk about the multiculturalism of hip-hop, you can see that at a hip-hop party, but you could definitely see it at a b-boy jam, right? B-boy jams, they really support each other, multicultural. You know what I mean? And that needs to also be related to hip-hop concerts, breakdance concerts, graffiti, all the elements of hip-hop. They just need to be celebrated more. We need to have more voices there. Yeah, and I think we're done. I think we're out of here. It's been a real great pleasure talking with you guys. I appreciate all the comments in the chat. That was really great. I'm here for any last questions or anything. Again, shout out to everybody who made comments and provided insight. Really appreciative. You could follow me on Instagram at UnLearn The World. Check out my website, unlearntheworld.com. There's a social media component to the website, so you could sign up as a member and you can add your own thoughts on different articles. You could create your own blog, all these different things. Check out hiphopforchange.org. Hip Hop for Change. Shout out and salute to everybody who's been supporting the cause, buying t-shirts that we have that say "End White Supremacy" or cool t-shirts like this one. You can check that out at hiphopforchange.org. We're doing a Agents of Change summer camp. This summer, at the end of July, we're going to be doing a youth artist residency program where we're paying kids not only to learn about the environment and eco-awareness and eco-justice and climate change, but we're also having them take that knowledge and create hip-hop projects based on that. So whether they're a dancer, a rapper, a DJ, they're going to use that knowledge to create hip-hop projects for the community, and we're paying them. We're paying them $200 for a week of summer camp. It's unprecedented. So shout out to California Artists Council for providing us the grant for that. Shout out to all the teachers and hip-hop instructors that we're hiring for that. Check out our online course via teachable.com. It's hiphopforchange.org/education. You can sign up there and get a full 6-week lesson with exclusive online tutorials from our educator staff on all the elements of hip-hop, but as well as the culture and the history. You'll learn all about the culture and history of hip-hop, in addition to knowledge being the 5th element of hip-hop, and how to be a community leader, how to actively pursue social justice, and build your communities at large. So, with that said, I'm out of here. Shout out to Auburn Hip Hop Congress. Everybody, Natalie, Rocky, J. Ross, all of y'all, salute. Appreciate you guys. And, yeah, hit me up if you got any additional questions. Peace.